My name is Oliver Wilkinson, and I am a member of the organisation Healing Through Remembering. And I want to warmly welcome everyone to the conference today. There are two housekeeping rules that I need to explain to you. One, I'm not aware that there's any plans for a fire alarm test, so we shouldn't be disrupted. However, if you do have to leave the building, there are two exits at the back, and apparently this moves so that we can go out this way as well, and we all meet just outside at the statue at the front of the building. The second one is, if you have a phone, now I know some people do have to take calls, but could you put it on vibrate or something so that we're not disrupting the proceedings too much? That being the case, then let's move on. Today's event is part of a joint project on amnesties, prosecution and public interest. The partners of the project are Queen's University, the University of Ulster and Healing Through Remembering. And the aim of this project is not simply about producing academic research, but more innovatively, the focus is to help develop the debate and inform discussion on these issues as we grapple with how we deal with our past. You can see more information about this if you have a look on the website. And you'll see there that while the project does create papers and articles, more importantly, you'll also see that it's about answering or trying to answer questions using examples from other countries to consider what is legally possible and operationally viable in this our context. It's about honest conversations and informing the debate, which is obviously what we hope you will be able to participate fully in today. The event's jointly organised by the Commission for Victims and Survivors in Northern Ireland and follows on from a successful joint initiative dealing with the past, law, prosecutions and public interest, which some of you may have participated in May of this year. The topic today is that of reparations. How do we remedy the past? It's about taking the conversation beyond the issues of truth and justice to look at other practical and imaginative ways to meet the requirements of those affected by conflict. The format is that first Luke Moffett from the project will give you a fairly detailed and formed definition of reparations as remedy. Then we're particularly delighted to have Judge Antonio Augusto Cansado Trindade, who's an International Court of Justice, who has come along to give us the benefit of an international perspective. This will be followed by a panel of local projects explaining what is the current context in the sector, and there will then be workshop sessions where you will get the opportunity to assess and discuss what's possible here, and no doubt you will have lots of questions on that issue. After lunch, a panel of academics with experience and learning will inform our debate with their examples of reparation or the lack of reparations, of the issues and the questions on reparations from places of conflict in different parts of the world. And then the final session will be with Luke and Brandon Hamber, considering where today's debate and discussion has taken us and what the next steps should be for organisations, for projects, institutions, politicians, and indeed wider society. All of the debate on dealing with the past evokes for us sensitive and difficult issues. And today's discussion may well raise personal issues in the midst of that wider debate. For that reason, we have two listeners here who are available to anyone who becomes anxious or distressed by anything that is said during the course of proceedings. If you're sitting with someone who you feel could benefit from speaking to one of the listeners, then speak to me, speak to Luke, who will be speaking next, to anyone from the Commission or Kate Turner. There are a few of us around, and we'll be around all day. Come and speak to us, and we will discreetly help you to speak in a private place. However, despite that note of caution, what we hope today will bring will be honest but respectful sharing of views and opinions, so that we learn together how best to deal with our past, so that we can all find ways of remedying the past and healing the future. With that, I would now like to hand over to Luke for a brief overview on what reparations includes and involves. Thank you.
Sorry, it's making sure it was the right presentation. Hello, my name is Luke Moffett. I'm a lecturer here at the School of Law. I would just like to say to you today, I've taken it off, it was on the last slide, that our hashtag for, if you want to tweet, is hashtag RemedyNI. So we'll be tweeting throughout the day. If you have any interesting points you want to contribute that. Really what I want to do now, and I've included this lecture in your packs, is to give a brief overview of what we mean by reparations and trying to remedy the past. From my perspective as an academic, I find that the conversation in Northern Ireland has focused on truth and justice, and these are important, critical issues to deal with. But missing from this conversation has been this notion of reparations. And so today we kind of want to explore this, thinking of creative ideas, as Oliver has said. And in the workshops, I'll give the opportunity for everybody to contribute, as well as ask questions to the judge himself and to the panel members. So really, I'm just going to give a brief overview and be very succinct. I've given more information there in your pack. Also, what I've included in your pack is the UN Basic Principles on Remedy and Reparations. This is a very comprehensive document. It is quite easy enough to read and takes heavily much influence by the work of the judge and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and how we deal with these very difficult issues in dealing with the past. So I've put together a diagram. I'm quite a visual learner, so it's trying to understand that when we talk about remedy in international law and human rights, we don't just think about truth and justice, but it's all about reparations. It's about improving people's access to appropriate remedies that can repair their harm. And so, for me, reparations are key for victims because they're victim-centred. It's trying to alleviate the suffering that's been caused to them. Also, what's important is that it gets the public aware and it gets them to acknowledge what has happened. And it gets those responsible to apologise, to admit what they'd done was wrong, and to affirm the dignity of the victims. And that's something that's possibly missing from Northern Ireland, is this wider conversation as to what happened, this wider narrative of who was responsible and who were the victims, what these acknowledged. Reparations can't be used just on their own. They're supposed to complement other processes such as truth and criminal justice. That said, criminal justice generally focuses on perpetrators, what they have done, and it leaves very little room for victims and ways in which their needs can be addressed. Truth process and truth commissions are very important in getting to those wider truths, the themes of what happened during a conflict. But again, it's that individual aspect that is missing. Reparations are supposed to be that missing piece of the jigsaw, which gives a more tangible, more physical and public acknowledgement of victim suffering. And really there's 5 main types of reparation. These are trying to respond to the different needs victims have, and are supposed to be used together. And I'll briefly just go through these. With restitution, we often talk about restoring property rights, but it's also about restoring individuals' rights to citizenship, such as those who are exiled, such as the return of passports and consular services. In terms of compensation, this is often quite strongly associated with reparations. In a sense, it's about giving money. And money is very useful because it gives individuals the freedom to spend it the way they want. That said, we shouldn't just be thinking about lump sums that are paid to victims. We should be thinking more creatively about university scholarships, about pensions, and how money can be used in a way that's long-term and sustainable. There's also rehabilitation, and this is key in improving individuals' functional ability. It's not just medical and psychological, it's also legal and social. And we do have a quite strong service culture in Northern Ireland, but it's about moving that from services into more legal entitlement as a right for victims. This is, quite a brief overview. I'm going to defer to the judge. The judge is the leading international expert on this. But measures of satisfaction, it's about engaging the public in what has happened to the victims. And this is done through memorials. And so when I was in northern Uganda, this was the Lakoti massacre, where over 60 people were killed by a non-state actor group, the Lord's Resistance Army. And what was important for the victims is, with the little money that they have, was to get the names of their family members who had been killed and put on this memorial for them. The village had nothing. It had been reduced to rubble, and it was just grass huts because the poverty had been induced by the conflict. Similarly, in Peru, they've got the Eye That Cries Memorial. And this is a stone which sits in a large garden, and the water trickles out of it to represent the human suffering that's happened in the past. And around it is in all these stones, which has all the names of all those who were killed, state actors, non-state actors, and civilians. And it's acknowledged human suffering that is personal and shared by all those victims and their families. It's also about the recovery of the disappeared and truth processes. It's about a wider understanding of reparations. In Northern Ireland, we've been very good at the fifth then type of guarantees of non-repetition, of embedding institutional reform that this violence of the past does not occur again, such as embedding human rights in our culture and way which we are governed, but also reforming the police service through the police ombudsman and decommission of paramilitary weapons. It's to ensure that these things do not happen again. And human rights is key in this. And it's about disseminating these shared values through every strata of society. Now, I've given more information in your packs on this, because in the workshop we will touch upon this. It is sometimes useful to talk about reparations in material and symbolic forms. Material try to respond to the economic cost of the victim, such as medical costs, education. But there's also symbolic. It's about the wider engagement with the public, to awaken the public as to what has happened to these victims, and to not forget that everybody is a citizen of a country, or is within its legal jurisdiction, should be treated with respect and have a right to a remedy. So the difficult issue then is, who's a victim? Who is eligible then for these reparations? Under the UN Basic Principles, under Principle 8, it's defined quite broadly as everybody who has suffered harm. And this includes carers, those who have witnessed or intervened, such as ambulance service, police, and the fire brigade. It also recognises that victims have a right to remedy, even if the perpetrator isn't identified, so it doesn't depend on criminal processes. That said, in other countries, it's not every victim that gets reparations. So people who have been put out of their homes will fall into a lower category. It generally focuses those who have continuing needs and suffered the most harm, such as those who were killed, disappeared, seriously injured, or tortured, or suffered sexual violence. And it's tried to ensure that the violence of the past doesn't ensure poverty or repetition in the future. It's trying to alleviate the suffering for victims. Who then is responsible? And this is a difficult issue. This whole conversation on remedy and reparations is not supposed to be easy, but it's about discussing it in an open and informed way. Generally, under international law, the state is responsible, particularly under human rights law, for the actions of its agents, so for security forces and for heads of states. That said, what we've seen in recent years in Colombia and even here in Northern Ireland is that there can be corporate responsibility of paramilitary groups, of non-state actors that can contribute. And it's to reflect that conflicts no more are just committed by states. It's more internal, and it's also individual as well. So it's thinking more creatively about processes, how we can get people engaged, to acknowledge what's happened, to take some sort of responsibility, and to move it away from criminal justice, which there will be some prosecutions, but for the majority there won't be, because it's based on sufficient evidence and reasonable doubt. What it all comes back to under international law, and this is what the UN Basic Principles reinforce, is that ultimately it's the state's responsibility to set up reparation mechanisms. And this is a basic principle of the rule of law. If individuals have suffered harm, they should have access to a sufficient and appropriate remedy. And that's something that should be established, but it's engaging all these different actors to contribute it. It's not just the state itself that needs to do this. Moving on then to Northern Ireland. Sorry, this is a bit quick, but it's just to give you a good introduction as to what's going on. As we know, reparations was partially suggested with a consultative group of the past about a recognition payment of £12,000 to others who were killed. And it was about acknowledging publicly that what had happened, that there was this suffering that was personal to these families, and that the state should acknowledge this. That said, it was ex gratia in the sense that it didn't acknowledge the responsibility of different actors within that, and it excluded those who were injured. So it was a very narrow definition of who was a victim. It also included the Day of Reflection, something which has been created by the Healing Through Remembering on the 21st of June, and a shared memorial. And these are important, they are, but they don't capture the whole picture of these 5 types of reparations which we've been talking about. The HAS talks kind of shrinked away from this issue of reparations and focused again more on services. Services are very helpful and important in ensuring rehabilitation, but they're discretionary. They're based on government funding and are not a legal entitlement. They're not a right for victims to claim. There was some innovations within the HAS talks in that was going to be a mental trauma service, as well as this need to acknowledge and to make apologies by those responsible. I'm sorry this has been very, very quick, but what I want to reinforce is that reparations are really 3 components. It's about acknowledgement, the public acknowledgements, and the recognition that victims have suffered. It's made by those who are responsible to reflect more corrective notions of justice, that those who have done these things shouldn't get away, and that we're not just giving blood money to victims to forget. It's about engaging in a public process. But ultimately, the state is there to create. The state has the resources and the legislative ability to pass this into law. And it's also about providing appropriate remedies to victims in material forms, but also symbolic. There's more information in your pack. It is a legal document, but it should be a good starting point for any discussions you're going to have today. That's my part done, the academic part. It is my pleasure and honour to welcome Judge Cansado Trinidade. The judge is a judge at the International Court of Justice at the moment. He sat on a number of very important and contentious cases. He is former president and judge of the Inter-American Court, and we couldn't have anybody better in the world today to speak to us on remedy and reparations. The judge himself has been key in defining the regime of reparations and remedy in the Inter-American Court in cases of the Peruvian government, which was abusing, committing disappearances, attacking non-state actors and civilians, issues of amnesty and prosecution. There's nobody better placed to speak to you today. He's been an inspiration for me and my work, and it is my pleasure and honour to have both him and his wife here today. So without further ado, I'd just like to welcome the judge. Okay.